I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is style. Whether it's extremes in character or tiny little musical nuance in the score being brought out, I think the combination of everything that Mozart writes is really connected to his own style, and that is especially important when playing anything by Mozart in an audition. That's something that a committee is going to be listening out for above all else. So let's get into this in the second movement of the 39th Symphony. Now, before we even begin, I think it's really important to notice that, first of all, the entire symphony is written in the key of E flat major. Now, the key of E flat is typically used by composers to give a feeling of majesty, something that sounds regal and glorious. Now, in the context of that overall E flat major, the second movement is written in A flat major, the subdominant, and it should sound like a warm, big hug. And that's what I try to really imagine before I play this piece. There's an incredibly special quality to this music. It is loving, it is just so beautiful and singing. So the key area is something to really keep in mind with this piece in particular. Now to start off, it's written piano, but let's not be too small in our sound. Let's have a beautifully warm vibrato. We want to think inward without sounding scared in any way. So I like to give a nice breath and then breathe out as I start this first note to kind of sink into the sound. So it's just like a ray of sunshine, just kind of sinking into that E flat. Kind of like a giant pillow, something that you sink into. Now, I mentioned vibrato, nice warm vibrato. Keep it as continuous as possible. Rhythm is a little bit tricky in this. Often these dotted figures can either sound like triplets or they can sound double dotted. So we want something that is a true, is true to the rhythm that is written. No faster, no slower. Just a nice dotted 16th note. Where we hear the little 30-second notes just enough. We want to give them a little bit of love, mainly in the left hand, so that they don't get lost in any way. And that kind of continues the line as well, makes it a longer phrase. Now, I go up the string in this next phrase. I think it's a nice color that way. Really kind of rising, but not overdoing it in terms of we shouldn't hear a real crescendo. It should just be going naturally with the shape that is already written into the music. And then again. So for that second time, in measure 6 into measure 7, I shift up to 4th position, but then I go over to the A string. And so we really kind of want to find an entire shape for these first 8 bars. We want to find a shape that really highlights the first half and then has the second half answer the first half. So I'll play these first 8 bars one more time, and just with an emphasis on how I'm phrasing this music. phrase kind of opens up a little bit more, and that really just has to do with what's already written in the music, the shape that Mozart already wrote for us. Now, going on from here, a lot of this has to do with bow control and making sure you're in the right part of the bow to get a beautiful sound. I play this in first position. So I'm trying to be as even as possible without kind of deadening the phrase. So I'm trying to allow the phrase to rise, but I'm not trying to do anything super fancy with my bow. Now this one may be a little bit more, just to show that it's the third time and that it continues. So these past 4 bars that I just played, it's important to find the balance between phrasing, finding the longer line of this, as well as holding the tempo back. It's easy because of these rests written into the music to kind of trip over ourselves and go a little bit faster than we should here. So keep a steady pulse, but phrase within that. Now you may hear that I'm putting some little nuanced dynamics in the music where they aren't actually written. Things like somewhat of an echo effect, and then I kind of come up a little bit towards the end of the phrase. Now, this sort of thing is, without being overdone in this, it's an attempt at really showing this kind of Mozartian singing character, right? If we're thinking about opera, as we should be almost all of the time with Mozart, I just imagine that this is a beautiful aria where the soprano is telling somewhat of a story, right? She's trying to say something, and so in this part, we really have to come up with a narrative, come up with something in your head, tell a story. And sometimes when we're doing that, when we're storytelling in music, we're going to be adding little dynamic fluctuations here and there. And as long as it's within the style, within the confines of the dynamics that are already written into the music, I think it just shows an audition committee that you're a musical player. So I would not shy away from phrasing in this section or in this piece as a whole. I think it just shows sensitivity and that you understand what is going on musically. Now, we imagine the rest of the orchestra continuing that line, and then we just join them. Now here, I stay on the G string for this minor phrase, and I really just try to darken the color. This is something new and it's unexpected. And then back to the original character. And intonation, as I just demonstrated, is tricky in this excerpt. Whether you're in the key of E flat or in the key of A flat, all of these flats really, they don't always sit well in the hand of a violinist. So just playing through with a metronome regularly not a metronome, sorry, a tuner regularly to really solidify the intonation is a really good idea with this piece. Now I'll go on to the finale. The finale of Symphony No. 39 is probably one of my favorite finales from any Mozart symphony. It is incredibly joyous, bubbly, light, and it has so much energy all the way throughout. It's just a fantastic piece of music. It's a tricky one to start off, especially if you're alone in an audition setting. So I like to start from the string with my bow, give myself the best chance at playing clearly. And I start in second position. It helps a lot with maneuvering the string crossings at the beginning. So I'm already thinking the tempo. I'm thinking bar by bar. And I just try to kind of cue myself and feel the dance right from the beginning. Now, it's very easy since there are so many of these 16th notes that are pickups to measures or separate 16th notes that come after a slurred set of 16th notes. It's easy for these to get swallowed up, to get muddy, and to get totally lost, especially in a bigger space. It may sound clear under your ear, but often these 16th notes do not actually come out clearly to someone sitting maybe 10 feet away. So what I like to really focus on is, that kind of comes as a given, right? We're gonna go to the downbeat of the bar in terms of phrasing. But while I keep that phrasing in mind, I'm also putting my attention on the two separate 16th notes that come after the slurred ones. These ones. So I almost think of punching those out ever so slightly with style and with grace, but I focus on articulating those even more than what's going on around them, just so that they do not get lost in the acoustic. So it's almost on every offbeat that these occur. So it might feel, if you're playing it under tempo to kind of get used to this feeling, which you should, it might kind of feel a little bit uneven, a little asymmetrical, like you've got like one leg is longer than the other. So there I'm kind of over-exaggerating and accenting all of those separate 16th notes. I think that's a great practice technique for you to approach this music with. But then, of course, realizing that once you play it up to speed and in context, you don't want to be accenting those notes. It's just to get used to kind of coordinating your right and left hands to bringing those notes out. So in context, it will really not sound accented at all, but I'm still aware of it. And And all that kind of equates to at tempo and in and in context is energy, right? Something that sparkles, something that is incredibly articulate and full of life. Now, getting into the forte, I'm just kind of opening up my bow arm just a little bit more than in the piano to get that sound. So I don't want to overdo. I certainly do not want to press the sound. I'm just kind of using a little bit more bow to get the forte dynamic. And have a lot of fun with this measure. Something that is just, you can imagine in a Mozart opera, all the commotion that would be going on in this scene. And so, what character would be played by this music? Someone, I'm sure, who was of a comedic kind of character, right? It's just a lot of fun to play that part. So really go for it, and that'll bring you into this next section. This is such great music making. So here, the character should be with abandon, right? We don't want to feel or sound held back, but at the same time, technically, it's very difficult to coordinate this bow stroke. So, practice technique. One way of approaching this passage is to work on it with open strings. So you kind of have to do a little detective work to figure out what those open strings are. But once you figure out those open strings and practice them, your left hand has a much easier time joining the right hand, and everything is just more coordinated. Here, just a little hint for the left hand. In the second half of each bar, I'm leaving down my first finger, so I don't have to do any extra movement to play that fifth across the string. You can do the same thing in these bars with your second finger. We're just all about minimizing kind of work effort here. Whatever you can do to make it easier for yourself technically, because at the end of the day, it will sound easier and more effortless to anyone listening, and be a lot more fun for you as well. Now, back up to speed, thinking more musically, it is really important in this section to just be bringing out the chords. You're basically outlining a set of chords. You don't have to worry about bringing out every note, kind of the opposite of the very beginning where it's good to bring out all of these notes so it's really energetic. Here, you're kind of using big brush strokes, and we're just ornamenting the harmony underneath. So we have a chord, right? E flat major. It's hard to play and then talk all the time. That is F minor. And then we have B flat dominant 7. And then we go all the way back to the E flat again. So really it's just kind of these three main chord changes, and then we can play with this sequence coming down. So really kind kind of lightening up the bow stroke and opening up your arm and using kind of bow speed to play this, not really bearing down and getting, we don't want a gritty sound in any way. So I'll just demonstrate this at tempo. Now, towards the end of this phrase, it's easy again to start to tense up because we've had this series of this pattern kind of repeated so many times now in forte, so it starts to feel a little tiring. So I just encourage you to keep opening up towards the end. And I'm thinking an on-the-string bow stroke. Not that it's legato, but it just has a lot of kind of energy. And it also keeps the sound ringing rather than something that's off the string just feels more condensed to me. And I don't think that's the character here. So really opening up the stroke. And for those last double stops, I'm really going for a nice full bow hair approach, and right at the frog. So a good retake. Otherwise, we can kind of come into a crash landing in the middle, or wherever else you kind of land, and it sounds totally muddy, and whatever beautiful phrase you had just completed, it kind of ruins it. So really focusing all the way to the end of that with those double stops with a nice sound. So that's what I have to say about the second and fourth movements of Mozart's 39th Symphony. This is such a fantastic piece. There's a lot to work on it. There's a lot to work on, rather, in this music. And if you just are led by the style of Mozart, it's always singing. There's always a story to be told. I think you'll have a lot of success and a lot of fun working on this music. I'll see you next time for the next edition of An Excerpt a Day.